All right, today we're jumping right into something pretty controversial. We're looking at a framework for attraction that basically throws mystery out the window. Instead, it treats human connection like, well, like a strategy you can execute.
And that really gets to the core question this material tries to answer, doesn't it? Is attraction just this random, lucky spark, chemistry? Or could it be something you can actually engineer? A kind of calculated science of influence and perception? It's a big question, so let's get into it.
So, the source material gives this system a pretty heavy name, the Machiavellian architecture of attraction. The whole idea is that attraction isn't something you just cross your fingers and hope for. Nope. It's something you build. Think of it like a negotiation, this subtle back and forth of power, perception, and, psychological triggers.
So, how does this whole architecture work? Well, according to these documents, it all stands on three main pillars. These are the big ideas, the core principles that supposedly let you define the reality of any interaction you're in. Okay, so pillar number one is something called frame control. And when they say frame, they're not talking about a picture frame. It's your personal reality. The vibe you give off, the assumptions you make, the whole story you're projecting. The argument is that in any conversation, whoever has the stronger frame is the one who ends up setting the tone and really the rules of the game. So you're probably asking, how do you do that? Well, the source breaks it down into four key things. First, you've got to cultivate this unshakable self-sufficiency, basically not needing anyone's approval. Second, you have to practice what they call strategic non-reactivity, staying cool as a cucumber under pressure. Third is this wild term, verbal alchemy, which is all about flipping challenges or even insults to your advantage. And last but not least, you've got to be intentionally unpredictable to keep things interesting.
Let's look at a concrete example from the source to see how this is supposed to work. Imagine she says, "I only date men who have private jets." Now, instead of getting defensive, the suggested response flips the script. It reframes the whole thing by asking a playful question, which totally seizes control of where the conversation is going.
Okay, that idea of control leads us right into pillar number 2, emotional regulation. The way the source puts it, this is all about being the calm, stable anchor in an emotional storm. The thinking is that if you can keep your composure, it signals strength and reliability, which are, supposedly, super attractive traits.
Now, this isn't about being a robot and suppressing your feelings. It's about containing them. The guide suggests listening without just reacting, creating this kind of emotional contrast. They actually call it the whiplash effect, where you mix warmth with firmness. And a really key part of this is being selective with your validation. You don't just hand it out freely. That way, when you do give it, it means something.
And check out this example from the guide, because the level of detail is pretty wild. It says that after she has an emotional vent, you should pause, then give a calm compliment that validates her strength, not the drama itself, and then you just smoothly change the subject. It's like a textbook move for what they mean by containment. All right, so we've got frame control for defining reality, emotional regulation for stabilizing it. That brings us to the third and final pillar, strategic mystery. This one is all about making that reality you've created, well, intriguing. The goal here is to basically become an unfinished story, a puzzle that the other person just has to solve. And the tools for this are all about controlling information. We're talking about using emotional cliffhangers when you tell a story, giving responses that are a little cryptic but still honest, and this is a big one, fighting that urge to over-explain yourself. The whole point is to make their mind do the work, to fill in the blanks, and hopefully get more invested in the process.
And here's a perfect example of what they mean by an emotional cliffhanger. You start a really compelling story, you hint that the stakes were high and that you learned something deep, and then you just stop. You deliberately leave it hanging. According to this framework, that creates this unresolved tension that's supposed to keep you on their mind long after the conversation's over.
So, okay, those are the tactics, the how-to, but the source material doesn't just stop there. It actually tries to back all this up with established psychological theories. This is where we shift from the what you do to the why it supposedly works, the scientific-sounding justification for the whole system.
And this table lays it all out pretty clearly. For frame control, it connects to cognitive dissonance theory. The idea is that your calm reaction to a challenge creates a sort of mental glitch for the other person, forcing them to rethink your status. For emotional regulation, it pulls from attachment theory, saying your composure makes you seem like a secure base. And finally, strategic mystery gets linked to something called the Zeigarnik effect, which is basically the psychological principle that our brains are obsessed with unfinished business. We remember incomplete things way better than finished ones. Okay, now we're getting into what is by far the most controversial part of this whole framework. And that's how it claims these strategies should be applied to different age groups. And it's really pointed defense of age gap relationships and the power dynamics that come with them.
So the source is very specific here. It argues that you can't use a one-size-fits-all approach. You have to tailor it to age. For example, with a woman from 18 to 23, who it describes as being in an exploration phase, the advice is to use playful challenges. For someone in their mid to late 20s, it's more about sophisticated, intellectual sparring. Then, as you move into the 30s and 40s, the strategy shifts again, this time towards showing off a kind of calm authority and deep emotional stability.
So this obviously brings up the question of power imbalances, right? Especially with big age gaps. So how does the source defend itself? This is really the crux of its argument. It claims these relationships aren't imbalanced at all. Instead, it frames them as an exchange of different, but equally powerful types of what it calls capital.
Let's dig into that idea of capital, because it's central to the whole thing. The documents say a woman in her 20s has huge biological capital. We're talking youth, vitality, all that stuff. This creates a lot of demand and gives her the power of choice. On the other side, a man in his 40s is said to have socioeconomic capital, so resources, stability, experience. This gives him the power to provide opportunities. The bottom line of their argument is that this isn't an imbalance, it's a trade. A balanced, reciprocal exchange of two different kinds of power.
And this quote from the source really just sums up their entire defense in one go. It's basically saying that anyone who worries about a power imbalance is looking at it wrong. They claim that kind of criticism is biased because it undervalues a woman's biological capital, her youth and desirability, while putting way too much weight on a man's money and status. So then, the documents try to explain away the social backlash you see against these kinds of relationships, and they point the finger specifically at older women. The source claims this criticism comes from three places: something it calls life stage jealousy, a fear of getting older and having fewer options, and finally, feminist critiques, which it sort of dismisses as just being about patriarchal power.
Now, we have to be clear here, the language the source uses gets really charged. To give you the full picture, we have to mention that it uses some incredibly provocative terms. It talks about unhinged rage when describing feminist critiques and uses a phrase like spoiled milk as a metaphor for women aging. This language is obviously not neutral. It's designed to be inflammatory and to push back hard against mainstream ideas. So, after all that really intense stuff, the documents try to bring it all back to an ethical high ground. The framework insists this is not about being fake or manipulative. Instead, they label the whole system strategic authenticity. The idea is that you're just consciously and deliberately presenting the absolute best version of your true self, the most confident, stable, and attractive you.
And really, that leaves us right where we started, with the big, central question. Is this whole framework a guide to self-improvement and genuine connection, like it says it is, or is it just a very detailed playbook for psychological manipulation? That's the real tension here, and it's at the very heart of this entire philosophy.